My passion for campaigning against child poverty stems from the reasons why I stood for Parliament. It's a motivation that I know will be shared right across this chamber, because we all serve in politics to change lives. And for me, that means that no child in Britain should grow up in poverty. We should not simply accept a situation where the luck of your birth can hold you back throughout your lifetime. Growing up in poverty means that you are more likely to fall behind in school, less likely to secure a stable job in the future, and more likely to suffer from ill health in later life. So this debate today is about making sure that Britain is a country that gives every child the opportunity of the best start in life. Now, Mr. Chairman, I want to rebuild a cross-party consensus and indeed to welcome the sentiments expressed by the Prime Minister as she stood on the steps of Downing Street. She signalled a fight against burning injustice with an unambiguous pledge to do everything we can to help anybody, whatever your background, to go as far as your talents will take you. I agree, because to succeed in the future, we must create a country that makes the most of all our talents. That is the task facing all of us in this place, and we should be judged by whether we do right by the next generation. In my Barnsley constituency, more than 1 in 4 children grow up in poverty. So I stand here today to give a voice to those 5,114 children. And the Minister will know that in her constituency, more than 1 in 4 children also grow up in poverty. Surely we can find common ground on the need for a target to change those alarming figures so that those children we both represent here today have the brightest possible future. Mr. Davis, in Britain today, on average, 9 children in a classroom of 30 grow up in poverty. For those nearly 4 million children, it can mean living in a cold and cramped home, falling behind in school, and not being able to join in activities with friends. The Children's Commission on Poverty empowered young people to share their own experiences of poverty. Over 18 months, they investigated how poverty affects their peers at school. And I want to give them a voice here today and share some of their findings. The Children's Commissioners were shocked and moved by what they found. Here's Luke, age 17. He said, "I'm surprised that even in the 21st century, children and young people are being subject to the harshest injustice in society, even within schooling. This should never be right in one of the world's richest countries." Poverty means children often have to dress differently and therefore to stand out. A classmate described how, "I saw some kids that didn't have blazers or coats in winter, and I could see they couldn't afford it." Pupils shared how those in poverty don't all qualify for free school meals if their parents are working. When that's the case, a meal at lunchtime may not always be affordable, a situation one child describes, saying, "It depends really on what my mum's situation is. If I don't have the money, I normally just wait until I get home to eat." I will give way, yes.
He's doing an excellent job setting out the problem that sadly we still face with child poverty in this country. Is he aware of the work of the Holiday Hunger campaign, which campaigns for children who have free school meals during term time, then have a 6-week-long summer holiday where they don't have access to those free school meals, and many of them go hungry? They're doing excellent work.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. I am aware of the campaign to which she's referred. I think they're doing incredibly important work in providing food and nourishment for children during the school holidays. And I will be saying a little bit more about that specific problem that she raises a bit later on in my speech. Mr. Chairman, for those who do receive free school meals, their poverty status can be highlighted by how they're required to buy their lunch with a token. This can hold up the queue as their card is being inspected. Those children's experiences, I believe, should give us pause. for a renewed focus on child poverty, which understands the experience of those who live it every day. And by doing so, I think that we can build a fairer country. It can also help deliver the vision set out by the Prime Minister as she took office. I will give way, yes.
I'm sure the honourable gentleman will agree with me that schemes such as we have in Scotland, where all children from primary 1 to 3, so from age 5 to 7, are given a free school meals to help get rid of some of the stigma attached to school meals.
I'm grateful for that intervention, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do absolutely agree. And much in the same vein that I am seeking to build a cross-party consensus in the campaign against child poverty, I'm also seeking to build a consensus in every corner of our country. And again, I'll be saying a little bit more of that later on in my speech. I was just saying, Mr. Chairman, that by seeking to understand the experiences of those who live in poverty every day, we can help build a fairer country, and one that delivers the vision set out by the Prime Minister as she took office. But let us be clear, this is now urgent, because the Institute for Fiscal Studies projects the biggest increase in relative child poverty in a generation, meaning the number of children growing up in poverty is expected to grow by 50% by 2020. So I will give way, yes.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I'm really pleased that he's having this debate today, Mr Davis, because it's very easy at Christmas time for there to be an orgy of consumption, and we do need to think about those other families who are not going to share in that. He's absolutely right about what's coming down the tracks. And does he share my concern that, first of all, having dissed the idea of relative poverty, the government has been trumpeting the fact that relative poverty didn't fall in the last 5 years. But more importantly, the changes made in the budget by the previous Chancellor after the general election mean that every family in the bottom third of the income distribution is going to be worse off.
Well, I'm very grateful for my honourable friend's intervention. I know that she has a very long-standing interest in the subject of child poverty. Again, I'll be referring to that a little bit later in my speech. But it's interesting that she raises the issue of poverty being relative, because it reminds me of a quote. And the quote is, "Even if we are not destitute, we still experience poverty. If we cannot afford things that society regards as essential, the fact that we do not suffer the conditions of 100 years ago is irrelevant. So poverty is relative, and those who pretend otherwise are wrong." That quote was from David Cameron. So I'm grateful for my honourable friend's intervention. Mr. Chairman, I was just reflecting on the fact that the Institute for Fiscal Studies project the biggest increase in relative child poverty in a generation, meaning that the number of children growing up in poverty is expected to grow by 50% by 2020. So the government has a choice to make, and with the power to stop that increase happening, their decisions will shape what kind of country we live in. Yet, what have we recently learned of the government's approach in response to my parliamentary questions? Well, we've learned that the Child Poverty Unit has been closed. Indeed, eliminating child poverty is no longer the goal of policy. The government admits that no money is being directly invested by the Department for Worker Pensions to develop evidence on what early interventions best support children, and that a maximum of only 7 civil servants support the government's Social Mobility Commission. This is not a record which matches the Prime Minister's rhetoric. I will.
I congratulate him, and I'm very pleased indeed the debate is taking place. But is there not another aspect which no doubt he would touch on in the course of his speech? There's not only the children living in poverty now and the projection of the increase of 50%, which is indeed very, very alarming news, and which the government doesn't seem to be concerned about. But it's quite likely that those children who are growing up in poverty now will, in themselves, have children that will live in poverty. And so we will continue in successive generations unless very firm steps are taken in order to decrease, not increase, but substantially decrease for children living in such conditions as my honourable friend is describing?
I'm grateful for the intervention of my honourable friend. He speaks with great experience on these matters. And he's absolutely right. This is about investing in the future, not just of young people, but in the very future of our country. And by ensuring that young people get the best possible start at the earliest of ages, we are ensuring the best possible life outcomes, not only for them as individuals and for their families, but more generally for us as a society and for us as a country. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm hoping very much that the Minister will be able to respond to the specific points that I've just made a moment ago. But clearly, the reasons that people live in poverty are unique to each individual, but there are shared experiences and similar causes. At the most basic level, it means simply not having enough money to cope with the circumstances in which families and individuals find themselves. So we can't be serious about tackling the problem unless we include income in our analysis and policy response to child poverty. Getting this right will mean families have greater security in their home and at work, and that all families have an adequate income to avoid poverty and live decent lives. That a family's income will shape the quality of childhood is easily understood. Every family wants the very best for their children, and often parents will go without in order to achieve that. Research from the Trussell Trust shows that 1 in 5 parents in the UK either skipped meals or relied on friends or family to feed their children last year. Now, of course, money is not everything, and we all know that the most important factors are love and attention, but that money is not everything does not mean it is nothing. Income is a central factor in meeting children's needs, and the government's forthcoming Social Mobility Green Paper, a successor to the long-delayed and unpublished Life Chances strategy, cannot be adequate without addressing child poverty. And tackling in-work poverty is critical, because 2 in 3 children in poverty grow up in a household where a parent works. So the reality is, work no longer provides a guaranteed route out of poverty. So our response must take a wider approach to address insecurity at work and better understand the increase in zero-hour contracts, delivering a real living wage for more workers. And to support those on low income, we will need to do more to provide opportunities for progression.
On that point,
I will, yes.
I was just wondering if the honourable member had considered a universal basic income as part of a package towards providing support for those at that end of our society.
Well, again, I'm grateful for my honourable friend's intervention. He's tempting me down a road which, though tempting, I'm going to sort of resist the opportunity to get into that sort of slightly different debate. But he may seek to make further points later on as we work our way through this. So, Mr. Chairman, I was just talking about taking a wider approach and supporting those on low income by doing more to provide opportunities for progression. So I'd ask the government to look at the success being delivered at a local level. So through programmes like the Workplace Scheme in Newham, which identifies the needs of employers to upskill local residents so that they may increase their earnings. It also means childcare being more flexible and available when and where parents need it. It's one of the biggest tolls on a family's budget, and when you account for that cost, an extra 130,000 children are pushed into poverty. So the government's forthcoming Green Paper must include income, child poverty, and other structural determinants of children's chances. It must recognise that childhood is a key stage in anyone's lifetime in itself, making up a 1/5 of the average lifespan. So it must be about a good and nurturing childhood as well as what happens next. Now, I hope the government will take the opportunity to change course so that we do not continue on a path that will see over 1 million more children live in poverty over this decade. Because, Mr. Chairman, ever-increasing child poverty is not inevitable. It is a result of political choices. We've seen it before, when child poverty rose sharply in the 1980s and peaked in the late 1990s before falling very significantly. The previous government, which happened to be a Labour one, showed us how that can be achieved. And we should recognise the work of the members for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford, for East Ham, for Birmingham, Hodge Hill and Bishop Auckland in taking the 2010 Child Poverty Act through this House.
My honourable friend,
I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and I congratulate him on securing this very important debate. Would he also acknowledge that one of the reasons that the Labour governments were able to maintain progress was because of very precise and well-tracked measurements and targeting arrangements, which ensured that when policy wasn't delivering the outcomes that were required, it was possible to take adjusting action and bring things back on track?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who speaks with real authority and experience, and I'm delighted that she's here to support this debate today. She's been incredibly helpful and generous with her time in supporting the work that I've been doing recently, and I'm very grateful for the point that she makes. She's absolutely right, and as somebody said to me just the other day, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. And I think it's very important to demonstrate that if you are serious about achieving something, that you set a target in order to achieve it. And she's absolutely right to draw reference to the previous Labour government. This was a government which put children first, which delivered the biggest improvement of any EU nation in tackling child poverty. From a Britain in 1997 with more children living in poverty than in almost any other industrialised nation, to a country in 2010 that lifted 1 million children out of poverty. Mr. Chairman, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because the government set themselves a target and made achieving it a priority. Investment in higher quality early years education, childcare and Sure Start centres was expanded fourfold. Support was expanded for families so that they could enjoy greater control over their lives and greater security in their finances, with policies including tax credit system and a doubling of the amount of maternity leave taken. We should, Mr. Chairman, I know it will give you particular pleasure for me to do this, pay tribute to the leadership of Gordon Brown in legislating for a child poverty target with support from parties across this House. I am reminded today of the former Prime Minister's memorable observation that while children may be 20% of the population, they are 100% of the future. And we have a duty to this generation to make progress on addressing child poverty once again, because it should scar our conscience as much as it does our children's futures. Mr. Chairman, I genuinely believe that all of us here today feel that responsibility and want to see child poverty fall. But, as in life, if you want to achieve something in government, it is useful to set a target. What that target is and how it should be met should be the focus of debate, but not the principle of having a target itself. No political party in this House has suggested abolishing all government targets. As the House of Commons Library has noted, a target is a clear expression of a policy priority, setting out exactly what the government wants to have done and by when. Targets let those responsible for delivery know what needs to happen so that they can plan, monitor and deliver. The Library goes on to explain that they allow organisations to be held to account on whether they meet the targets, including by Parliament. They can provide a focus on long-term strategic goals in areas where short-term pressures would otherwise mean that these goals might not be achieved. That is why I believe that setting a target can help realise a common purpose to tackle child poverty, which includes communities, employers and government at every level. Now, Mr. Chairman, my private member's bill provides an opportunity for this House to make that intention clear. It will receive a second reading on Friday the 3rd of February, and I hope it will earn the support of government, because Parliament does have a strong record of working on a cross-party basis on this issue, most notably in passing the 2010 Child Poverty Act, which committed both current and future governments to take action to eliminate child poverty. So in introducing my bill, I do not seek to be prescriptive in what that target should be. Rather, we should be clear that our goal is that no child should grow up in poverty, and that we will measure our progress by a target. Mr. Chairman, you will, I hope, note my repeated efforts to convey that this private member's bill is not politically motivated. It is too important and too urgent for that. In your constituency, Mr. Chairman, 1 in 5 children grow up in poverty, some 3,743 children. So, simply put, the present situation is unacceptable, and without action, what will follow is worse still. And there is a growing consensus outside of this Parliament that the government needs to do more, and quickly. And I would like to take this opportunity to place on record my thanks to those charities and stakeholders who recently attended a roundtable event that I hosted here in Parliament. We should all recognise the vital work that the sector undertakes every day to help those living in poverty. The Child Poverty Action Group has long campaigned on this issue, and I'm proud to have their support for my bill. Barnardo's, the Children's Society, Bottle UK, Gingerbread, the Family and Childcare Trust, Save the Children, JRF, and the Equality Trust all have my profound thanks for their input. I hope there will be others. And I would be very happy to meet either with the Minister or her colleague, the Minister of State, in the new year to share the extent of support for a target among those who know the most about this issue. But concerningly, this government has been active in seeking to change how we understand child poverty, while also removing a duty to reduce it. The 2016 Welfare Reform and Work Act replaced the 2010 Child Poverty Act's reporting obligations, bringing in the life chances measures of worklessness and educational attainment. The Child Poverty Commission became the Social Mobility and Child Poverty Commission, and is now just the Social Mobility Commission. We have learned through a parliamentary question that its crucial work is supported by only 7 civil servants at most. And it is with some concern that we have learned this week that the Child Poverty Unit has been quietly abolished, without adequate information on that fact being provided to Parliament. So, no child poverty target, no child poverty unit, no staff resources, and no stated intention of ending child poverty. No matter how many children are set to grow up in poverty in the years ahead, we can and must do much better than that. And we can see this from the work that is taking place around the country, because local communities have not been able to wait for the government to take action. In my Barnsley constituency, we have led a campaign bringing together members of the community and the local council to take action. As part of this campaign, we asked the public to name just one thing which could make a difference to children locally. Ideas ranged from new requirements on developments for affordable housing to expanding childcare, and the great example set by retired teachers lending their expertise to tutor local students. This has informed the ongoing work of Barnsley Council's Anti-Poverty Board. It brings local partners together to support residents affected by government spending cuts and welfare reforms. They've been working hard to identify families most in need, targeting resources to provide debt advice, information on fuel policy initiatives, and healthy eating programmes. In Barnsley, we have recently opened a community shop in my own constituency. The community shop has agreements with many of the largest food manufacturers in the local area, redistributing good quality surplus products at much more affordable prices. I will give way, yeah.
Very generous, and I appreciate it, like my other honourable members. Is he aware that a number of boroughs, certainly mine, where there is a good deal, unfortunately, of child poverty, have provision for nursery education. We have very good schools for under fives, which are much appreciated, and so many of those who attend come from households of very low income. And at the moment, and this is what I want him to comment on, is he aware that so many involved in nursery education have been writing to us expressing deep concern that funding arrangements can so alter in the next 2 years that some of these places which I've been mentioning, nursery schools and classes, will either have to close down completely or reduce the number of children coming to them?
Again, I'm grateful for my honourable friend's intervention. He's absolutely right to bring our attention to this pressing concern. And this is one of the kind of primary motivations for this debate today, to draw attention to the fact that the plight of currently nearly 4 million children in our country is set to get worse, not better. And I think that is a matter of profound concern for all of us, and all of us who believe that child poverty must be reduced, I think have an absolute responsibility to work together in order to achieve that stated aim. Another honourable friend earlier on drew reference to a project which sought to provide food for children during the school holidays, and I was just explaining the benefit of the community shop proposal. One has just recently opened in my own constituency, and the community shop concept involves having agreements with local food manufacturers which enable the community shop to sell good quality food at affordable prices to people on low incomes. But in addition to being able to provide that food to local people, it also helps those members, those people locally, with other issues which may be holding them back. So it's able to provide advice on financial matters, but also to train individuals to prepare for job interviews. The community shop, which is brilliantly led by John Marron, is just one example, but a good one, of the crucial work that is going on around the country to support families living on low incomes and in poverty. And lives are changed by these initiatives where people come together to speak up for the less fortunate and share their time and their expertise to be good neighbours in the service of others. Mr Davis, I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognise the efforts in this area of the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead. As honourable members will know, he has a very long-standing interest in understanding poverty and remains a powerful advocate. He's championed the Feeding Britain project, which works to reduce food poverty at a local level. And I look forward to welcoming Rosie Oglesby, their Chief Executive, to Barnsley to discuss this matter further in the new year. And as I made the point earlier, Mr Chairman, across the country, in all of our nations, we see work that is ongoing to make a difference. The Scottish Government are currently consulting on proposals to establish a Scottish child poverty target. The Welsh Government has a responsibility to report on progress towards achieving their child poverty objectives. And in Northern Ireland, the Executive's child poverty strategy commits to eradicate child poverty in the future. These efforts must now be backed by a government at a UK level. So, Mr Davis, I now just briefly want to set out the reasons why I believe that the government should seek to prioritise early years interventions, because too many children are stuck following a path that is set for them in their infancy. The importance of a child's early years in forming their life chances is well understood. The House should note the long-standing contribution of the member from Nottingham North in campaigning for better early years provision and conducting an independent review in the previous Parliament. Today, a child born in a deprived area is likely to die 9 years earlier than someone from a wealthier postcode across town. To put that right will require us to bring together government, campaigners and educationalists to learn from best practice internationally. The 5 for 5 campaign is leading a global effort to do just that, focusing on the 5 things that shape a child's basic care: good nutrition, healthcare, learning, play and protection, and of course, a loving home environment. We should recognise the ongoing work of their world and their president, Sarah Brown, in this campaign. Because by the time a child reaches the age of 5, about 90% of their brain development is complete. So we should think bigger about how to reinvigorate early years provision through programmes like Sure Start, rather than accelerating the cuts that we've seen since 2010. That is how we will best tackle the growing gap between the richest and the rest, both inside and outside of our schools. Just as quality teaching makes all the difference in the classroom, a well-skilled nursery workforce led by early years teachers is proven to help prevent the poorest children from falling behind. 1 in 5 children and a third of the poorest children arrive at primary school having fallen behind in the key elements of school readiness. That is why we should recognise the campaign of Save the Children to address this. So I'd ask the Minister to lead discussions with colleagues across government into how every child can benefit from an early education led by qualified early years teachers. In my Barnsley constituency, 3 in 5 children who attend an independent nursery don't have access to support from a qualified early years teacher. A child's education can provide a route out of poverty, building on a foundation that is laid in the early years. And that is why I'm so proud to champion City Year UK, a charity which empowers young people aged 18 to 25 to serve others in tackling educational inequalities. Through spending a year volunteering in disadvantaged schools, those involved develop lifelong leadership skills and become role models to raise the aspiration of others. Now, Mr. Chairman, currently the evidence demonstrates how the government is not getting it right. By investing in a new generation of grammar schools, which the evidence shows do not deliver. By not investing enough in building the evidence base for early years interventions, and by accelerating the closure of Sure Start children's centres, which we know do work so well. Policies across government must seek to make a difference to children. Changes to tax and benefits over the next 4 years will take more than £1 in every £10 from the pockets of the poorest families. Because of this, I believe that the government should end the freeze on working age benefits. The 4-year freeze promises to be the primary driver of increased poverty. Ending it would not only be morally right, particularly with prices at the till set to rise, but also sound economics. Because we know that the less well-off households spend more of the money they have than the better off. So there is a clear moral case for action on poverty, but also a sound economic one, because it's estimated that £1 in every £5 of public spending is associated with poverty, and that this costs the UK taxpayer £78 billion every year. So as well as redirecting public spending in this way, poverty worsens the key economic challenges we face. It lowers productivity and limits spending power, which undermines the strong economy we need for the future. Yet the human cost is the greatest of all, and that is why this government's penny-wise but pound-foolish approach to investing in children must end. Mr. Chairman, poverty destroys childhoods and limits futures. Stopping that, as the Prime Minister has pledged, should be the defining mission for this and for any government, because in times of profound change, those with privilege and wealth have a security that is not afforded to those without. In setting out the reasons why child poverty should be prioritised, I've sought to take a constructive approach and find common ground. I detailed the case for a target to reduce child poverty and highlighted support from those organisations with real experience and expertise. So let me ask the Minister very clearly today, when she stands up to respond, what is the government's position on establishing a child poverty target? We can end child poverty so that every child can realise their potential. That has to be our ambition. and it should be a challenge that unites us all. Through that effort, we can provide security, opportunity and hope to those who need it most. But if the Prime Minister's words on the streets of Downing Street mean anything, and we will judge this government by its actions, not its rhetoric, then they have to set a target. I'm proud, very proud, to represent Barnsley, and I see firsthand the difference this government's policies make to so many of my constituents. In standing up for them and their futures today, I'm reminded of our Barnsley motto, Spectima Agendo, or judge us by our actions. That will be my guiding principle as we hear the Minister's response both today and in the coming months. It would be an historic mistake to abandon the battle against child poverty. So let's set ourselves a target and take action. Thank you.